firsts in the last year. This is my first virtual fireside chat. So
oh, look at that. Yeah.
we'll see if we can iron out some bugs. So hello to everyone in the audience. My name is Jason Pressman. I'm a partner at Shasta Ventures. We're just going to do very brief introductions and then we'll dive right into the topic. We're an early stage venture firm that invests at the Series A in companies in enterprise software. Historically, we've done a little bit of consumer and enterprise. As an example, I'm on the board of Nextdoor. But about 5 years ago, we refined our focus and focus only on investments in Series A companies in software in early revenue. I was fortunate enough to be the early stage investor in Zuora back in, I believe, 2008, and have been on the board ever since through the IPO and remain on the board today. So Tien, you want to say a little word about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Well, to all the startups out there, if you are enterprise software, SaaS, early stage SaaS company, you should drop Jason a line. He's been a huge partner for ours and our success. We were able to, I think when Jason started, we were probably $0 in revenue. You know, we're a software as a service company focused on the subscription economy, really helping all sorts of companies thrive in this new great business model. And Jason really saw us through and helped take us public almost 3 years ago now, and remains a huge part of the company. So thank you, Jason, and look forward to speaking.
Excellent. Well, Tien, when we first met way back in 2008, you hadn't yet coined the term subscription economy, but I knew you were onto something big because there was this massive trend. But now subscription economy is something people talk about a lot. But more recently, you've started talking about the end of ownership and a buying behavior that's driving the subscription economy forward. Can you describe a little bit what you mean by that?
Well, yeah. You know, these days, so much of our lives is really run by the services that we offer. And all companies now are saying, you know, we're waking up to the power of subscription businesses. We love the recurring revenue model. It sure feels like these subscription businesses are on fire, growing incredibly fast. We really want to participate in that and share in the growth. One of the big mistakes they tend to make is thinking, okay, this is about taking our existing product and just letting people pay over time. And, you know, I joined Salesforce in 1999 when it was still, you know, less than a dozen folks working outside of Mark's house. And made the same mistake back then too, that the software as a service or whatever we called it back then was just simply letting people rent software. And it's really not that. It's really, the key thing is you have to think about this as taking away the burden of ownership away from your customers. Instead of thinking of what you do as innovating and creating a product that you want your customers to buy, own, maintain, take care of, right? To say, look, what you really want is you really want to eat, you really want to be entertained, you really want to do some work, you're just trying to get from point A to point B. And I'll make sure I put an infrastructure out there, you know, a set of cars, a set of data centers, right? You know, video streaming libraries or music, whatever happens to be, that allows you to get anything you want in this space, in this category with the most convenience possible. And as a result, because we're all getting used to this, right? You know, we don't buy DVDs anymore. We don't buy individual songs on Apple iTunes, right? That sure seems quaint. We don't buy software anymore. And we think this is really going to spread across all parts of our lives. And we believe that, you know, pretty soon, one day, we're really not going to buy anything. We're simply going to use the services that we subscribe to meet our everyday needs. And this end of ownership concept is really coming at us really, really fast.
How far do you really take it? Aren't there some things that you have to own?
Well, there's, you know, people used to think you have to own software, and it turned out that's certainly not true. People think you have to own cars. I think, you know, when we started the company back in 2008, you know, we saw a company called Zipcar that was making the whole idea of car ownership kind of quaint, right? Why own the car if you can simply subscribe to a Zipcar membership, grab a car anytime you need it, and go. And if you think about the first time that you ever used Uber and Lyft, that was a transformational experience, right? Your need to own a car simply dropped at that point. And then you're seeing a whole generation of folks, you know, millennials and now Gen Z, that are saying, no, why would I own a home? If I own a home, I'm stuck. I want to be mobile. I want to go to where, you know, wherever I can go best. If this remote work thing stays, I can really work anywhere in the world. And so people are really finding that owning something is actually just a huge burden. I mean, it's a handcuff, and not having to own something and getting what you need instead is simply a better model.
Got it. Well, it does certainly seem like in the time we've been working together that I've been surprised by the number of things that people rent, guitars as an example, and cars, as you just pointed out. So clearly, over the last 12 months during quarantine and lockdowns, there's been an acceleration of the trend towards the subscription economy and the end of ownership. What have you seen from your vantage point at Zuora?
Well, in March, I'll tell you, like everything's, everything's hitting. You're not quite sure how things are going to play out, right? A lot of doom and gloom predictions. What we found, and we started looking at our data, and we were fortunate enough to have, we have all these companies using us, and so we can see the flow of subscription revenue. So we anonymize the data, and we used to look at this, twice a year to see the growth of the subscription economy overall. We publish something called the Subscription Economy Index that people cite to get a sense of how fast the space is growing. We started looking at it on a monthly basis, not a weekly basis. And what we found is that this business model simply is resilient. And half the companies were really unaffected. Their growth rates had no real material effect. The quarter of the companies, companies like Zoom, companies like Fender, really just saw their revenues take off, right? Growing by 3x, 4x, 5x. We just saw this incredible spike. And then even the quarter of companies that were negatively affected, most of them were still growing, just growing at a slower rate, right? Contrast the companies that were declining by 70, 80, 90%, you just saw their revenues completely drop when stores were closed, when all, aspects of physical locations went out the door. And then the last bucket, the worst guys, they still had this recurring loyal customer base, and they were able to pivot. And so you imagine you have all these customers pay you on a regular basis, imagine you're Resi, and people aren't making restaurant reservations anymore. But you've got all these recurring customers. You can say, hey, look, I understand the situation you're in. We can pivot. We can pivot towards other things that you can need. Home delivery, right? Curbside pickup. And they did a really good job holding on to their customers. And so in hindsight now, almost a year later, these companies simply just did much better than non-subscription companies. And so what we're seeing now is the understanding of this model really start to spread. And companies are really now, waking up to the power of this business model. And so if you're a startup out there, right? If you're a startup out there, why would you, right, build a business model that's not based on subscriptions, right? Why wouldn't you? You're so focused on customers, you're so focused on delivering value. At the end of the day, right, translating that customer value into your business model is the secret of the best startups.
Well, I remember in March when we had an emergency board call to talk about the impact of COVID. And then I remember in June or July, we were all, as everyone in the world was just a deer in headlights, didn't know what to do. But I remember in June or July when you started putting forward some of these insights around how customers were pivoting towards their offerings to help and maintain. Yeah. What did Zuora do? What did you do for our customers at Zuora? And then how did you help our customers to help themselves learn how to pivot their business models, even in relation to COVID, to be better customer oriented?
Yeah, I think the lesson for all companies is you got to start with the customer. And so when you have a subscription-based business model, what you're ultimately after is long-term customer relationships. All right. And so the first thing we did is say, look, we're all in this boat together. All right. And to the extent that we can help our customers out, because they're either going to do well or they're not. We don't really know. Right. It's March, it's April, it's May. If they're not going to do well, then look, it is what it is, right? So, and we'll figure it out, right? We'll figure out what to do. If they're going to do well, then we want them as long-term customers. And so the right thing to do is to treat them right at that point. And so, so we said, look, we had to understand it, right? You had to justify it. You didn't want people sort of taking advantage of things, certainly. But if our customers were in a tough situation, they were the transportation sector, they were the hospitality sector. We were very liberal and working with them on payments and stuff like that, right? To really help them through, because you're trying to just, it's a chance to create some great customer loyalty. The other thing is because our product is in that monetization, engine, what we do is we do billing, we do payments, we do e-commerce, we do revenue recognition. We're in that monetization aspect. We help them pivot. And so we said, look, how can we help our customers through this situation? And because, our system is a system used to offer credits and payments and restructuring contracts and things like that, we started publishing all this content. We started jumping on online, webinars and online sessions to teach them how to use our system. And what we found is if we can deliver them agility to really navigate this thing, right, then they were really able to thrive. One of my favorite examples is a company called Pluralsight out there that does e-learning. It's been a fantastic company. And they said, look, with all these people at home, maybe there's a chance for us to actually, help, right? You're stuck at home, you want, watch some of our e-learning videos, learn a new skill, learn how to code, right? And so they decided to offer their system for free for the month of April, right? Sign up for our system. They signed up like over, I think, 1 million people in less than a week. And, shelter in place only happened mid-March. And so they only had 2 weeks to kind of pull this off. And the agility that we were able to provide our customers and how to navigate that turned out to be one of the things that we could do to help all the companies, all our customer base navigate through this thing.
Well, one of the things that I've been unbelievably impressed about you and the entire company over all the years we've worked together is how insightful you've become and the company has become at helping our customers learn how to be subscription, how to navigate the subscription economy. But there's a good question that just came in from the audience that's actually really interesting that I don't think we've ever talked about, which is how do you think about subscription businesses for very seasonal businesses? So for example, if you have an education company, not like necessarily like a e-learning company, but maybe something that really is more tied to the school year and thinking about a company like that or someone else launching a seasonal business, have a subscription.
Well, the subscription business model is one of the great tools to smooth out seasonality. And if you think about Amazon in the retailing e-commerce space, right? Black Friday used to be this, the date, they called it Black Friday because retailers, you would lose all money all year. And on Black Friday is when you actually go from being in the red and into the black, right? So you're spending 11 months out of the year in the red and you make money in 1 month. And Amazon says, look, we're going to have Amazon Prime. Amazon Prime renews at different parts of the year, right? And it's just a fantastic tool to smooth out revenues. And so what you find is a lot of the seasonality is tied to the psychology of when to buy and distribution model, one-time sales sort of bunch up into a specific environment. You talk about education. Yeah, sure, the school year is 9 months out of the year. But if you can smooth out your collections throughout that 9 months, you can certainly eliminate some of that seasonality. And then if you take a step back and say, okay, that's true, but is learning 9 months out of the year, right? Or is learning should be a, around the clock, around the year type of activity. You can learn during the summer as well, right? Or take a step back and say, hey, on the education space, the funny thing is these colleges and universities are the only company that fires all their customers after 2 years or 4 years, which doesn't make any sense, right? Because learning, especially these days with the technology and the skills changing so fast, has to be a lifelong experience. And so we're starting to see some education startups and existing companies saying, look, let's take a different approach, right? And let's look at learning and education as a lifelong experience. I think Chegg is a fantastic example where Chegg is more and more less about renting your textbooks, but more about we're going to help you learn. Not just in the 4 years you're in college, right? Or in the 2 years you're in college, but really throughout your entire career.
Excellent. Well, a related question that also just came in from the audience is about pricing models in SaaS and how those pricing models have evolved over the last 15 years as you've watched them closely, or really 20 years, all the way back to your Salesforce days.
Yeah, I'll tell you, pricing is a never-ending sophisticated topic. If you look at the companies, the industries that are in this business model. Sure, we can all be inspired by SaaS companies, right? Companies like Salesforce, Zendesk, DocuSign. But the telecom companies really are probably the most sophisticated because they've been doing this over many, many decades. And they're constantly reinventing pricing models. I think T-Mobile just completely revamped the pricing model for a 5G environment, for example, right? Every few years, they seem to go from unlimited to non-unlimited to unlimited plans, right? And I think
it's always unlimited asterisk, not
an asterisk. Yeah. Well, so that type of innovation is really how you compete and how you continue to make yourself relevant to changing customer needs. But there's one lesson that I kind of turn back to, right? And we can sort of talk about, if we have more time about, do you usage-based pricing, non-usage, users, free trials, freemiums. There's an infinite number of variations. But the key thing is to tie your pricing to value. And so we talked earlier about the end of ownership. And this is going to get to why software as a service companies, right? This whole concept of net dollar retention is super, super important. But let's take it out of software. Let's imagine you're a car company. If your business model, your GM, your Ford, your Mercedes-Benz, right, your Toyota, if your business model is based on number of cars sold over the next 10 years, you're going to have a hard time growing because the number of cars sold worldwide continues to decline year over year. The cars are just really good. There's a lot of alternatives out there, right? But miles driven continues to go up year over year, right? Maybe it took a blip during this pandemic, but the long-term trend for miles driven is we're going to drive more and more. And so if your business model is based on miles driven, you're growing. If your business model is based on unit sales, you're declining. This is true, newspapers. This is true game consoles. If your business model is based on number of units of Sony PlayStation sold, you got headwinds. But if your business model is based on number of hours of games played, I mean, that number just continues to climb year over year. And so tying your pricing to consumption is one of the key things if you want to grow. And then you could just focus on getting your customers to use your product, get value from your product, and the revenue side of the house really starts to take care of itself.
Yeah, this notion of consumption-based pricing is something that we've talked about a lot. And I think for the audience is really a major trend in all businesses, not just in SaaS, but you can see it in SaaS with AWS and Snowflake, but you can see it, as Tien said, in other industries. And a lot of companies are innovating, like insurance. A lot of insurance companies are now offering insurance based on the miles that you drive. And this consumption-based pricing, I think, just resonates deeply with entrepreneurs. So can you talk a little bit about the metrics for SaaS companies? You just mentioned net dollar retention, but what are the things that you think about are really key for Zuora? What are the key metrics you think startups should be thinking about as they're building a SaaS or subscription-based company?
Yeah, I think it's really understanding the recurring revenue model. And unfortunately, when they teach you in accounting class or business school class or corporate finance class, a lot of these business models were really based on the old product model. Right? You think about movies. And look, we're going to spend $100, $200 million to make a movie. Maybe we're making an indie flick for $10, $20 million. If I can sell it for X number of tickets, right, units, if you will, then I'm going to make back that money. And that's just a classic. It's what they teach you in corporate finance. And then you look at Netflix, and Netflix says, well, we don't have that model, right? We have 200 million subscribers giving us on average $100 a year. That's $20 billion. And so we have a known recurring revenue base of $20 million, and how we use that $20 billion to keep our customers and to grow, it's just a completely different calculus. And so that's why, like, thinking about the recurring revenue potential of your customer base, and then thinking about, well, how much does it cost, right, to really service that? And then with the remaining money, right, how do you reinvest that money? And how do you think about, what percent of that do you reinvest in to kind of keep your customers happy and continue to subscribe? And how much do you invest to kind of grow, right? Grow by acquiring new customers or actually finding other things, other value that you can create for your customers so your revenue per customer continues to grow. That's really a key thing. And to do that at a single customer level, a unit economic model, if you will, right? What's the cost of customer acquisition? What's the lifetime customer value? But also do that at a macro level, right? At an entire income statement level. Now, I know we certainly have, there's lots and lots of folks, I think, watching that are early stage. You want to make sure you do this at the right time, right? And so what I find with pricing and metrics is, if you're really starting off, just kind of visualize when you're 10 million, you're $100 million, right? How many customers do you have? And what does that mean in terms of revenue per customers, right? Assuming that you've got a recurring revenue model, because why wouldn't you, right? It's a subscription economy. And then just getting close to that, or having a line of sight that while you're working out the product market fit, if you will. And don't obsess too much about pricing and don't obsess too much about this, but you want to be in the right general area. And then once you get to like 10, 20, $30 million, right? That's when you start to really refine that business model, refine the unit economics to make it all work right.
Great. So as we saw in the lead in, there were a record number of IPOs in 2020. 2021 is off to a similar massive start. And one of the things that, and there's been all sorts of IPOs, but one of the things that's been really obvious is that subscription businesses, SaaS companies, have been rewarded really remarkably by Wall Street.
Why do you think that is? I mean, a lot of it comes as a common theme through all the things we've talked about. And do you think that trend is going to continue?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can look at it two ways, right? You can look at the past versus the future. You can always look at it as non-subscription businesses and subscription businesses, and it's really, really simple, right? If you had, if someone gave you two offers, offer A is I'll give you $10 once, and offer B is I'll give you $10 a year for the next 10 years. Obviously, offer B is going to be much, much stronger, and so you're going to see, right, that the value of subscription economies are always going to be higher, right? And what you need to do is you need to build a business model that really retains your customers and allows you to grow on an economic basis. And so I think we're just at the start. And I think, in many ways, the wall has been lifted from product business and subscription businesses. You're going to see more and more non-subscription revenues rolling into the subscription side, including what I'll call maybe the other business model for tech companies, which is advertising. And, there was a recent article, about Jack Dorsey and Twitter saying, maybe we should be offering subscriptions, right? And maybe this is actually the solution to some of the things that we're seeing in our business model today.
So when you think all the way back to when you were at Salesforce and you were thinking about the billing problem, what were some of the key challenges that you lived with? And what were some of the reasons that led you to leave and start Zuora?
Well, look, when I look at startups, and ultimately, what you're looking for is you're looking for a big unaddressed part of the market, all right? But why would there be an unaddressed part of the market? And it's usually because something changed, right? Some technology happened, some shift happened, where hey, things that weren't a big deal, all of a sudden an opportunity opened up. Right? Something that wasn't possible to address before, now you can certainly address. And so, ultimately, when you look at it that way, what you're looking for is that, examples, right? The iPhone came about, and now the idea of tracking cars and getting a car to show up, right? Just where you stand or take you where you want to go is now all of a sudden possible, that it wasn't possible before. And so when we looked at it, we said, we really understood the subscription model. After working at Salesforce for a decade and at WebEx, my co-founders for a decade, trying to figure it out. So really two things. One is, can this business model not just work for software, but work for all industries? And we realized it can. And if we could play a role in helping, all companies, there's definitely tech companies, SaaS companies, but really, all sorts of companies and all sorts of industries navigate this shift, then there's a big enough market. And then the second thing is, well, okay, but what do we do? And what we found is that product economy companies need a specific type of enterprise software tech stack that's anchored on ERP, right? SAP, Oracles are probably the kings of that world. But when you look at these type of businesses, these telecom companies, right? And it's in the early days of Salesforce, we modeled ourselves like a phone company. And they use just a very, very different set of systems. And so that's what we saw. We saw that a marketplace would open up, all right, because there's very different type of business models. And if this business model was going to be ascendant, the marketplace was going to open up a greenfield opportunity. And that's something that, with our know-how, with our experience, that we were able to go attack.
Excellent. Well, shifting gears a little bit, because some of the questions that are coming in are about more common advice around startups. So sure. What were some of the biggest challenges that you faced at starting Zuora? But maybe differently, what advice would you give? What uncommon advice would you give to a founder that might surprise them?
Uncommon advice. Well, look, obviously, pick your VCs carefully because you're going to be with them for a long time. And so I think we did well on that dimension. And it's something that I don't take for granted.
It is a good point, Tien, and I'll just emphasize it. And I think about, give you a chance to think also, because I'm an early stage VC. And so when we make investments, we're typically committing that we're going to be involved with a company for a decade or longer. And for companies that go public, and it is typically 10 years or more. And so you really need to think about the relationship you're going to have with your board member as almost like a marriage because or a really close partnership because you're going to work with that person for a very, very long time. And I think a lot of times entrepreneurs don't realize the gravity of that decision. And I think vetting it, and you certainly did a heavy job of vetting. You had lots of great options, and I'm pleased that you chose me. So I think that's really good advice.
Yeah. You know, the other thing I'd say is it's a journey, but what does that really mean, right? And so I went up talking to a lot of early stage folks. They're looking for advice, and the first thing you got to understand is what phase of the journey are they on? Because there's so many complexities, right? You don't build a $1 billion value company really overnight. And so one of the things I try to help entrepreneurs see is, well, let me just sort of break it up into multiple stages, if you will, right? And just arbitrarily put them at 1 million, 3 million, 10 million, 30 million, 100 million, 300 million. And to say, okay, when you're in that phase of say the 1 to 3 run or the 0 to 1 run, the things you're trying to do are different. All right. And there's things that people will tell you, it's like, you know, you might not have to deal with that until you're in a $3 to $100 million run. On the other hand, you know, things that you would be ignoring, right? If you're fortunate enough, if you've been successful enough to get to $30 million, you got to rethink a whole bunch of different things and to continue that growth. And so to really, you know, pencil out the phases of the company, encourage them to take a step back and reinvent themselves and reinvent the company at each one of these milestones is one of the key things. And then you could break it down. You could break it down in terms of, okay, well, what does that mean for the product? What does that mean for the team? What does that mean for how I lead? What does that mean for the distribution channel? What does that mean for the business model? All right. And every time you start getting close to those things, to take a look at those things and try to reinvent the company and reinvent themselves. That's probably, you know, the best advice I can give. You know, you got to sort of break it down to what exactly that means. But that would be, I think, the highest order bit that I see.
That's really good advice. So coming back to subscriptions, you've mentioned car subscriptions, you've mentioned SaaS subscriptions. Do you see a future in subscriptions for smaller hardware products like cell phones or tech gadgets?
Absolutely. But I think the thing to think about is not, can I sell a piece of hardware on a rental model, right? Look, there's a revolution happening. I'll sort of take it back to one of the things that really changed how we thought. It's 1999. We're at Salesforce. You know, we're less than 30 people. The internet is really early, and we pushed our first. You know, how early? Like, you know, Wi-Fi wasn't not popular yet. We didn't have high-speed bandwidth at the home. The reason they called it Cyber Monday was people go back to work and have a high-speed internet, right, in order to shop, right? And so and we pushed out our first version of our software at Salesforce, and we realized that we can actually see what people are doing. Now, look, any startup out there says, well, that's kind of obvious, but in 1999, you just didn't know. If you developed software and you shipped it on a CD, you had no idea how your customers are actually using the software, right? Intuit used to follow people home from the retail store to watch how they install the software to make sure they got it right. But we could actually see it. And so that blew our mind. And so we were committed to this cloud model, this SaaS model, once we saw that actually allowed us to create a better product, a better experience, a better outcome for our customers. Now, every physical product is going to go through that same journey. All right. So whether you buy a car, you buy a washing machine, you buy a medical scanner, right? You buy a watch, these things are all now connected to the internet. So visualize, you know, there's thousands of car engineers, right? There's thousands of washing machine engineers that are just all of a sudden saying, gosh, that's how my customers actually use my product. Because they're all collecting the data. It's all showing up in some cloud-based service somewhere. And so what you got to realize is the physical products are now just simply, you know, an edge device or a portal, right, into a broader service. The service, you know, it's what Sun used to say, right? The network is the computer. The service in the cloud, the network of the service is where the power is. And your physical device is just an access point, right, into that service. And that's how you have to think. And so when you think like that, you know, you can absolutely do that. I mean, that's how Peloton thinks, right? Now, that doesn't mean they sell the Peloton for $10 a month. I mean, that thing is still like whatever it is, $2,000, $3,000, right? And so there are multiple models, business models that you can do. But the starting point is to think of what you do as a service and think of your hardware as simply a portal into that service. If the price points are such, certainly, yeah, perhaps you can just throw the product in as part of it. But you could also just sell the product as simply as part of the service offering as well.
And that's great advice. And do you feel like companies need to build that telemetry to monitor how the hardware is used themselves, or is there a third-party company, or is Zuora going to provide a lot of that telemetry?
Oh, sure. We'll talk about that at the next board meeting.
I read the material last night.
So there's a lot of great tools out there, and today in the cloud-based service is certainly not hard. And there's also a lot of IoT systems there that are really purpose-built for doing things like that.
Okay. As it relates to pricing, do you recommend that companies have one price, three prices, a buy it all at once price, and all you can eat price? Or does it really vary by companies? How should companies that are launching subscription services think about iterating, picking, choosing, and modifying their pricing models?
Yeah, this is like I don't know, maybe chess, because that TV show Queen's Gambit is recent, top of mind, right? A lot of these moves are dynamic moves, right? Or moves in a dynamic marketplace, depending on what your competitors are doing, what your customers are doing. And so the key thing is this is never changing. And so what you find is your pricing models start to proliferate and you prune it. It starts to proliferate and you prune it. And the key thing is it's a dynamic thing. Now, if you're starting off, I would say start simple, right? Because you can always launch new prices later on if you've got the agility, right? If you've got the right system that helps you do that. So start off simple, right? If you're thinking, gosh, we need 4 price plans or 4 tiers right up front, well, maybe not. Maybe you can get away with 2 or 3 and learn from it. And then based on the data that you're seeing, really plot the next few moves.
Do you have any advice for freemium SaaS at seed stage, unit economics, product, how to think about where the paying gates are? Any generalized advice there?
We're not big on the freemium model. I'm not big on the freemium model. I think certainly there's some great examples as a point thing, right? I think what Zoom does with education right now is probably a good top of mind example. If you look at the big freemium models out there, a lot of them that didn't necessarily pan out just because you needed so much volume. The other thing, and we've been doing a lot of research, we have over 12 years of data on this, is sort of past that 30, 60-day evaluation point. It could even be like 15 days, but once you're about that 45, 60 days, the customer's inclination to pay really starts to drop. It's almost like they're conditioned not to pay. And so, and then, when they hit the freemium model and they hit this wall and they haven't been paying for a year, they're almost a little bit annoyed at it, right? And so, again, the model could work if you just have millions of users and millions of customers and you only need 2, 3, 4% of that base to convert. But it's hard. It's hard for most SaaS companies to really get to that level of scale. All right. And so, so there are other ways of accomplishing it with free trials. Maybe there's a bucket of stuff that you can have free, right? And so Amazon say, well, here's like, $500 credits for free. And once you hit that limit, right, in advance that is something that you would want to pay for. But start with paying, right? And then tell yourself, what is the best way to acquire customers to get to that paying point versus, hey, I'm just going to offer for free. And then look, I'll figure out how to monetize that. I think that's a mistake a lot of founders are making.
What about recapturing customers who are trying to cancel? How do you think about that? I mean, there was that, I think it was a Comcast call that was recorded a few years ago. I don't know if we ever even talked about it, where a customer was trying to cancel their service because they were moving and they got transferred from call center to call center, and the customer service rep just wouldn't let them cancel. It was just absolutely appalling customer service experience. Clearly, that's not the way to go. But what do you think about when there is a customer that can be saved? How should companies think about that?
Well, look, I think if you're an early stage company, right? Let's we're not. Most of the people on this conferences are not going to be a big giant monopoly like Comcast, and so you got to treat it as a learning experience. Right. And so the key thing is, look, if you're a 5-person company, how do you use it as a learning experience? If you're a 100-person company, how do you use it as a learning experience? And then it gets harder, right? When you're a 300-person company, a 500-person company, a 3,000-person company, how do you use it as a learning experience? And so I tend to say, look, let's try to save the customer, but it's not meant to say, save them at all costs. It's meant to say, look, we made a promise to the customer, a vision, and how do we learn from that, right? And to the extent that you can learn from that and keep the customer, fantastic. But even if you can't, at least make sure that you learn from that experience.
What metrics do you recommend companies use? We talked a little bit before about net dollar retention, but what metrics do you recommend companies use to think about the health and satisfaction of their customers?
I think ultimately every product has a usage profile. And I think most of the time what we see is there's some value in a more sophisticated one, but there's also a value for a simple one. And what I find is when most companies kind of do the analysis and try to find the indicators, there's usually one simple thing, right? You'd be surprised at how many people can just look at logons, right? If what percent of the customer base is logging on a regular basis, and that equivalent of MAU or DAU, of how much that, that's just correlated to the highest thing. And then you can get more sophisticated from there, right? And so I'd say that's engagement is probably the right word, right? The level of engagement that your users and customers have with your product is the early leading indicator. And then revenue, of course, is truly, truly important. But that tends to be a lagging indicator for that. And that's more how well you're doing monetizing the customer and how well you're doing growing it and building a good business model.
Okay. At the very earliest stages of a company, aside from talking to users and iterating on product, which is clearly important, what other things do you think founders should really be spending time
on? I don't think founders think enough about the business model, right? They're obviously good at the product because they're starting with some sort of product vision, and it's natural to start obsessing about that, which is great, and that's why it leads them to build great product, understand great customers, but really truly understanding the business model, right? Because at the end of the day, the better the business model you have, the more resources you're going to have, and the more you can actually fuel the product vision that you have. And the other thing, a mistake I see founders have is, we're only going to talk to VCs when we're actually fundraising. All right. So they're like, okay, we're going to put it off. Okay, we got to fundraise now. We're going to sort of block off 2 weeks. And then you get the like that show Silicon Valley where you're going like door to door to door, right down Sand Hill Road. And that just does not, lead to a great process. Imagine like if I had to, put a, gun to your head and say, look, you got to, maybe it's like the show The Bachelor, you got to marry someone, right, in 2 weeks. Well, look, are you really going to make a great decision? And so, so you want to take the time out to get to know folks and then, hone the pitch, if you will, right? And the pitch isn't to sell somebody on something. The pitch is, do you have clarity of your market vision, your product vision, and why you're building a great business, right? And so I tended to want to talk to more potential investors when we're not fundraising, and to just get a better view of the business, right? It forces you to see it from an outside-in standpoint.
We have about a minute and a half left. So just as we round up and try to think about the future, where you're leaving the founders out there with some words of wisdom, aside from, you've talked a lot about starting companies, you've talked a lot about what's happening in the subscription economy. Where do you think things are going in the subscription economy? What are the big trends to look for? What should people be building their businesses around? What maybe should some of these founders think about that they're not right now?
Well, look, our view is that subscription-based business at the end of the day are business models where you start with the customer. And even though we all say that, the fundamental truth is business models have been based over the last 120 years, right? Ever since Henry Ford, assembly lines, right? Mass production, it's all about building a unit, right? Some product that you sell over and over again, pens, laptops, cars, whatever it happens to be. And that business model ultimately is not sustainable. And so if you look at it that way, then the future is going to be about the customer. The future is about a digital relationship with your customers because technology really enables that. And so every company has to say, look, we are in a subscription economy. Don't get fooled into existing mental models of how to build businesses based on product economy. Start with the customer. And when you look at it that way, there's all sorts of places you can go. There's so much more opportunity. in the world to build better services for customers. And the IPOs, the last 12 years of innovation really simply points to that. So I think it's a great time to be a founder. It's a great time to be a startup. And it's a great time to be in a subscription economy.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I'd sum up the whole thing as be maniacally focused on your customer and subscription for the future.
That's a good lesson.
Tien, it's been a terrific last 12 years. Great to do this together, and looking forward to the next 12.
Thanks, Jason. All right. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Not really sure what we're supposed to do to wrap up. I think they did it.